history of Africa is deeply intertwined with its spiritual traditions. Long before the arrival of Europeans, Africans had developed highly sophisticated religious systems that governed not only ritual practices but also ethics, governance, medicine, and cosmology. Among the Yoruba people of West Africa, one of the most profound systems of knowledge and spirituality is Ifa, a divinatory tradition rooted in an expansive oral corpus known as Oduifa. Ifa is not merely fortune-telling, it is a holistic framework of philosophy, morality, and metaphysics that connects the individual, the community, nature, and the divine. When European colonizers began arriving on African shores in the 15th century, their primary goals were economic exploitation, territorial expansion, and political domination. Christianity became one of the most effective tools in achieving these aims. Missionary activity was rarely separate from colonial project. Rather, it often paved the way for colonization, softening communities for conquest by undermining indigenous belief systems. The colonized understood that to control a people, it is not enough to subjugate their bodies. One must also capture their minds, reshape their values, and sever them from their sources of cultural and spiritual power. In the case of the Yoruba, this meant attacking Ifa and its associated religious institutions. The guiding question of this video, did colonizers use Christianity to enslave Africans and deceive them away from the power of Ifa divination and Yoruba spirituality, requires careful unpacking. The answer is not simply yes or no. Christianity was indeed weaponized as a colonial tool to suppress indigenous spirituality and justify systems of slavery and subjugation. But Africans were not passive victims. The Yoruba, like many other peoples, developed strategies of resistance, adaptation, and resilience. Some syncretized their traditions with Christianity, others preserved Ifa in secret. The very survival and flourishing of Ifa today, despite centuries of attack, is itself testimony to its enduring power. This video explores the power of Ifa divination and Yoruba spirituality, the strategies colonizers employed through Christianity to dismantle it, and the ways in which Africans resisted. By situating this discussion within broader context of history, theology, philosophy, and cultural resilience, we uncover not only the destructive role of colonial Christianity, but also the indomitable strength of Yoruba spirituality as a source of identity and liberation. Yoruba spirituality before colonization. The Yoruba are one of the largest ethnic groups in West Africa, primarily concentrated in present-day southwestern Nigeria, with significant populations in Benin and Togo. Before the arrival of Europeans, the Yoruba had a complex and well-developed spiritual system. At the center of Yoruba cosmology is Olodumare, the supreme deity, considered the source of all life and power. Unlike the anthropomorphic god of Abrahamic traditions, Olodumare is transcendent, rarely worshipped directly. Instead, communication with the divine takes place through the Orisha, a pantheon of deities and forces that govern different aspects of nature, society, and the human condition. Each Orisha embodies specific attributes. Shango, for example, represents justice, thunder, and kingship. Oshun, on the other hand, governs fertility, love, and rivers. Obatala is linked to wisdom, purity, and creation. These deities are not distant abstractions, but intimately tied to the daily lives of the Yoruba. Rituals, festivals, sacrifices, and prayers maintain harmony between human, nature, and the divine. Ancestors too occupy a central place in the Yoruba spirituality. Known as Egungun, they are revered not as a distant memory, but as active participants in the community's well-being. Through masquerades, offerings, and rituals, the living maintain a reciprocal relationship with the dead, ensuring community between past, present, and the future. This ancestral veneration reinforces communal ethics and identity. Ifa is the heart of Yoruba epistemology. It is both a divinatory system and a vast oral literary corpus containing proverbs, myths, historical narratives, and ethical teachings. The custodians of this knowledge are Babalawo, male priests, and Iyanifa, female priests. Through divination, they interpret the Oduifa to provide guidance on issues ranging from personal dilemmas to matters of state governance. Ifa is powerful because it functions simultaneously as religion, philosophy, and social structure. It addresses existential questions such as who am I? What is my destiny? How do I live in harmony with others? It also serves practical functions, diagnosing illnesses, resolving conflicts, planning agricultural cycles, and making political decisions. In short, Ifa was a comprehensive system of order, identity, and power. Colonizers understood perhaps more clearly than some Africans themselves that Ifa was more than ritual. It was the intellectual and spiritual backbone of Yoruba civilization. Unlike the Bible, which is codified in a fixed text, Ifa is oral and dynamic. The Odu Ifa corpus contains 256 principal signs, each with hundreds of verses, making it a living archive of Yoruba wisdom. Ifa represents a non-Western epistemology, a way of knowing rooted in interconnectedness. Knowledge is not abstract, but relational, connecting human destiny with cosmic order. For example, Ifa teaches that every individual has an Ori, spiritual head, destiny, chosen before birth, and that aligning with one's Ori is the key to fulfillment. Ifa also encompasses herbal medicine known as Ogun. Babalawo are often healers who prescribe both physical remedies and spiritual rituals. This integration of science, spirituality, and ethics made Ifa a holistic system of knowledge. For colonizers, Ifa was a rival source of authority. Missionaries quickly realized that so long as Yoruba people maintained allegiance to Ifa, Christianity would have limited influence. Thus, Ifa became a primary target for demonization. It was labeled as witchcraft, sorcery, or paganism. This delegitimization was not only theological alone, it was deeply political. To dismantle Ifa was to dismantle the foundation of Yoruba autonomy. The Portuguese were among the first Europeans to arrive on the West African coast in the 15th century. Their initial interest was trade, first in gold and later in human beings. As the transatlantic slave trade expanded, missionaries accompanied traders, aiming to convert Africans to Christianity. These early efforts often failed in Yoruba regions, but they laid the groundwork for later British missionary activity in the 19th century. Christian missionaries presented themselves as saviors of heathen souls, but their work was deeply entangled with imperial agendas. Mission schools taught literacy primarily through the Bible, framing Western education as inseparable from Christian faith. This positioned Christianity as the gateway to civilization and upward mobility, while Yoruba spirituality was cast as backwards. Missionaries explicitly targeted Orisha worship. Shrines were destroyed, sacred groves desecrated, and priests shamed. The language of idolatry and paganism framed Yoruba gods as demons, instilling fear and shame among converts. Festivals that had once unified and united communities were stigmatized as immoral. One of the greatest weapons of colonization was psychological. Christianity taught Africans to abandon their ancestral systems in favor of a foreign worldview. By discrediting Ifa, colonizers stripped the Yoruba of a powerful system of resistance. Spiritual disarmament made political and economic domination easier. European Christians used the Bible to justify slavery. The so-called curse of Ham was interpreted to mean that Africans were divinely destined to serve. Missionaries preached obedience, patience, and suffering as virtues, aligning perfectly with the demands of slave masters and colonial authorities. In colonial Nigeria, Christian missions often worked hand in hand with the colonial state. While missionaries claimed to save souls, they also produced subjects loyal to the colonial order. Converts were more likely to adopt Western values, making them easier to govern. Colonial authorities passed laws criminalizing witchcraft and native medicine, categories under which Ifa and other practices were lumped. This delegitimized traditional healers and priests, stripping them of authority and livelihood. Christian converts were taught to view Ifa as evil. Families were torn apart as younger generations educated in mission schools abandoned ancestral traditions to advance socially or professionally. Many Yoruba adopted Christianity, often at the expense of their own indigenous faith. Shrines were desecrated, sacred forests destroyed, and priests publicly humiliated. This physical destruction mirrored the psychological assault on Yoruba spirituality. Despite these pressures, Ifa and Yoruba spirituality did not vanish. Instead, they adapted and resisted. Many Yoruba continued practicing Ifa in secret, disguising rituals as Christian prayers or incorporating Orisha symbols into everyday life. In the Americas, for example, enslaved Yoruba and other Africans preserved their traditions by blending them with Catholicism. Thus were born religions like Candomblé in Brazil and Santeria in Cuba and Voodoo in Haiti. Saints became masks for Orisha, allowing traditions to survive under the watchful eyes of slave masters. Even in Nigeria, Ifa remained strong in certain regions. While Christianity spread rapidly, many communities maintained dual religious identities, attending church on Sunday while consulting Babalawo during crisis. The long-term impact of Christian colonization was profound. Africans were taught to view their traditions as inferior, primitive, or demonic. This internalized inferiority created generational shame and self-alienation. Yoruba people who converted often lost fluency in their own traditions. Oral knowledge chains were broken, leading to cultural amnesia. Even today, many Africans, Christian and Muslim, regard Ifa with suspicion, associating it with witchcraft. This lingering colonial mindset continues to marginalize indigenous knowledge systems. In recent decades, there have been a revival of interest in Ifa and Yoruba spirituality, both in Africa and the diaspora. Scholars have begun to study Ifa not as superstition, but as philosophy, ethics, and literature. Universities now host research on Yoruba cosmology, showing its sophistication. African diaspora communities increasingly reclaim Ifa as part of cultural identity. Afro-descendants in the Americas and Europe are turning to Orisha traditions as a form of decolonization. For many, returning to Ifa is not only spiritual but also therapeutic, a way to heal the wounds of colonization, slavery, and cultural loss. And so again we return to our question: did colonizers use Christianity to enslave Africans and deceive them away from the power of Ifa divination and Yoruba spirituality? The evidence is overwhelmingly yes. Christianity was weaponized to delegitimize indigenous traditions, justify slavery, and enforce colonial domination. By labeling Ifa as evil and pagan, colonizers dismantled the spiritual and intellectual backbone of Yoruba society. Yet the story does not end there. Despite centuries of attack, Ifa endures. Its wisdom has survived in Nigeria, in the diaspora, and in the hearts of those who continue to seek guidance from its vast corpus. Today, Ifa is not only alive, it is thriving, finding new relevance in a world searching for balance, justice, and spiritual truth. Christianity was indeed a tool of enslavement, but Ifa remains a tool of liberation. By reclaiming Ifa, Yoruba people and their descendants are not only reconnecting with their ancestors, but also resisting the lingering colonial mindset that sought to erase them. In this sense, Ifa is more than divination. It is a philosophy of resilience, a testament to survival, and a beacon for the future.